So hello everybody, shortly after I got the Zoom L6, the L6max was announced, and I was pretty annoyed about that because it had some features I was really missing on the smaller model. And I can already tell you right now, if you are not totally tight on money and not every centimeter in your bag counts to you, you should definitely get the Max instead of the smaller model. Currently, the one I only paid €64 more than for the smaller model, and I think so that's not really a big argument which model you should get. But what does the new model bring to the table? Let's first do some unboxing here. Having a look at the device itself, it comes with two additional microphone inputs, which have also a combi jack, so you can also plug guitars in there or other instruments. And talking about guitars, that's also a nice addition. You have now the high set button on the first two channels, which means you can directly connect the guitar or a bass guitar to the mixer, and we will check out that later on as well. Furthermore, it has some pad switches. So you, for example, if you connect a Eurorack output, which has a pretty hot signal, you can now turn it down to -20 dBs on all the 4 stereo channels. So pretty handy as well, a nice addition on this mixer. Another main feature, the submix, is something I also missed on an original model. So now we have a separate channel, and you can also monitor that separately if you want on the headphones. And talking about headphones, that's also a nice touch. You get now 2 headphone outputs, one main and one for the submix, but that's also switchable between master and submix. So you could create a second submix if you jam together with a friend, for example. Instead of 3 scenes, you get now 4 scenes, but the buttons are only half the size than the previous buttons. But nevertheless, I think they're quite okay to press, but might be a little bit more fiddly. And another main thing is we finally got a display on that, and we don't have to navigate blind. That's pretty helpful. But also you can now configure most of the settings for which you had to use the configuration application on the computer before that. And now mostly all of the parameters can be directly set on the device, which is pretty helpful, and you don't need to bring a computer if you want to change a setting for your mixer. Yeah, and it can be battery powered. This is also a nice touch. So you only need 4 AA batteries to do so. And on the right hand side, you will also find another USB plug to power the device, but you can also power it from the top USB, so both is possible, and also the slot for inserting the SD card. And if you stumble over this video by accident, totally watch my video, my in-depth review about the small model, the L6, because it's very identical to the Max, and I will not repeat all the details I showed in this previous video, for example, the MIDI control and these things, and will only focus on what's new on this model. So let's fire it up, and first thing you need to do is to take some settings, and you need to set the date and time, which will be remembered, so you only have to do that once. And after you did that, so let's check out if it remembers the setting just to be sure, and let's turn it on again. And it's luckily not asking again about that, but it's still complaining about the SD card. So let's insert the SD card I already had bought for the old model, for the L6 model, and let's insert that into the device and fire it up again. And it asks us to test the SD card, and there's a slow and a fast mode, and okay, slow is several hours, so we won't do that. So let's go with a quick test. And that finished successfully, so the SD card seems to be fine to be used with that device. So I noticed that the firmware is the first one, the original one 1.0, but there is already a 1.1 available. So let's see how easy we can do that. I downloaded the firmware from a Zoom site. Inside of this zip file, you find a binary file bin, and to get this into the mixer, you need to activate the sharing of the disk from the mixer via USB. So this is also a nice touch that you can do that directly from the mixer and you don't have to do that from the PC. So you can choose that option, and then on the PC, the folder or the disk will show up, and on that disk you can then copy over that binary file to the root directory on that disk. And then you can close the connection, and let's see what happens. It says straight away that we have a firmware update, and you press the record button to execute the process, and it will do its thing. And after rebooting and rebooting again, it's finally happy, and we have 1.1 installed on the mixer. So pretty easy process, takes a little bit, but nevertheless easy to do. Let's have a look at the application, what new option it gives to us, and which of these options are available on the mixer as well and which are not. So here we see all the settings for the pads you can play as well on the mixer, and it has a new option, MIDI clock. We will check that later, what that is good for or not. And what else is there? So most of the parameters seem to be identical, we can find there. So not that much news. And also the effect settings are identical, also nothing new to find there. So here you can configure now the routing, so to separate the headphone control from the main out. So that's the setting we are after and was missing on our L6. So pretty nice to have that now. But let's also have a look at the MIDI parameters we can control via the mixers. So everything is there as well as in the smaller model. And we get now the new submix. So you can also control the submix setting for each of the tracks. But sadly, that's it. So there is still no control possibilities for the effect parameters or for play or stop, for example. That's not available. That would be a nice touch if we could control such parameters as well. So, and let's have a look how that works on the device itself. So you go up and down with these knobs, you enter the setting with this menu setting, and then you can confirm with the fourth button your selection. So pretty easy to use. And you also have the option to rename projects, copy them. And yeah, you could, for example, use it as a backing playback device with some limitations, which we will talk about later on as well. So pretty powerful what you can do on the device itself. So you can also load other projects, not only one, and playback them or keep on working on that, overdubbing and such things. Here you have the settings for the recorder mode, for the sound pads. All of the settings of the sound pads are also choosable there. That's also nice. So you could change a sound for one of the sound pads directly on the mixer now. You don't have to use the application. That's really cool. And so on and so forth. So the only settings missing are the MIDI controls, so you cannot change the MIDI CC numbers on the mixer itself. With which it is controlled, you have to use the application to do so. But besides that, all of the other parameters are there, and that's pretty helpful to have them in direct access. So let's check out what's going on with the pads. As I said already in the previous video, I thought they are pretty gimmicky, but nevertheless, you can do some pretty cool stuff with that. So for example, bringing in effects, but also you can use it as a little drum machine, and that's totally cool. So what I did is simply assign 4 drum sounds to the different pads, and you can trigger them via MIDI. So if you have, for example, a hardware sequencer with you, you can simply connect it via MIDI in or the USB MIDI in, and then send over notes and use it as a drum computer, and that's really, really cool. So, and what is a synchronization setting good for? I'm not fully sure, and manual is not that helpful in really explaining what's going on, but if you send MIDI clock to the device, it looks like it synchronizes it to quarter notes or something like this. I'm not sure if that is that much helpful, so if I set everything to synchronized, it seems to quantize it down to quarter notes. So if you have any idea what's the benefit of that or how it actually really works, please tell me down in the comments. I'd like to know that. So, but let's have a look also at the new input channels, which provide not only phantom power now, but also high set input. So I connected my bass guitar here to the first channel, and let's crank up the volume. And I also activated high set, which is pretty helpful for a guitar to adjust the impedance. And that sounds pretty nice. Okay, more volume. So there's no EQ or anything on that, it's just a pure signal into the mixer. So, but let's also give it a bit of effect. So let's add the first reverb setting, the hall. So that sounds actually quite nice. So much for that. I also wanted to check out the recording. So how can you use the recording? Something you need to know is that it's actually not a proper multi-track recorder. So you cannot select which track you want to record. It always records everything. So all of the 8 input channels, or the 4 stereo and 4 mono inputs, are always recorded, and you cannot record the drum machine, so the pads, which is a bit sad because you cannot. I first tried to have a drum beat recorded, and then I was wondering why it's not in the recording. So this output is not recorded, and you will always get all the other tracks. So how can you overdub at all? You can use this bounce button, which you will find at the right-hand side of the record button. And this will bounce all of these 8 tracks into one, but also the single ones will be kept. And then you can overdub in the form of that. It will record again all of the 8 tracks. So yeah, it's something easy to use, but not really powerful. So it would be really cool if you could enable which tracks you want to record and then do a proper overdub. But nevertheless, that's not maybe in the design of what they intended. It should be easy, and the main intention is to simply record what you're doing, so maybe a full gig, and for that it does really a nice job. And what you also need to know is that everything you playback is coming via the main out, so you don't have any option to change the sound of these playback tracks, and you cannot even adjust the volume. So the volume is only adjusted via the main output. So if you want to use it as a playback device, you need to be very careful to have one fixed setting and then never touch the main output again, and then only adjust all the other channels. So this might be a bit tricky if you intend something like this. I have not tested, but I guess it should work if you do a workaround by using the main outputs and feeding them back into one of the stereo inputs, and then using only the submix channels for mixing. And this could also be the workaround to use and apply effects, for example, to the 4 drum pads or the sound pads. But nevertheless, it's always dangerous to get a feedback loop by doing so, but it could work. So to sum up, the extensions you get and the new features you get in this Max version are totally worth getting this model. And as I said, the price difference is pretty small, so there's not too much to think about to get the larger model. I like it a lot and need to tinker a bit more with it. And what do you think? Did you also upgrade to the Max model? Do you like it? Do you have any other tips how to use it? Yeah, and until next time, make some funky music.